Welcome to the TMB Women in Business podcast, created for the aspiring CEO. Every week, we provide you with tips on all things business and entrepreneurship. You'll hear from industry leaders on topics such as marketing, business growth, and branding. This podcast is hosted by Mahi Kolla, the 16-year-old teen entrepreneur behind the Minty Boutique, a luxe stationery company with a mission to change the world. Hi guys, welcome back to the TMB Women in Business podcast. Today I will be doing a solo episode where I talk about why self-development will elevate and grow your business faster than you have ever seen it grow before. So I am so excited today because I think self-development is something that's talked about a lot, but the reasoning behind it isn't something that's mentioned a lot, I believe. Why is self-development just going to translate and correlate directly to your business growth? I'm going to talk about today. So let's just jump into it. The first thing I want to talk about is what is self-development? It isn't just, listening to a few podcasts here and there, watching a TED Talk and feeling inspired in the moment. I truly believe self-development is long-term growth, personal growth in your career, in your personal life. Self-development is taking the initiative to get that growth by doing whatever you need to. And I'm going to be sharing some of the ways that you can develop your career today, but personally, like in your personal life, I believe there's so many ways. Self-care itself is a way of self-development because as you take care of yourself, you are allowing yourself to be more comfortable and you're allowing yourself to reconnect with yourself. And that itself is self-development. So I believe self-development to be of course, the betterment of ourselves, but it also leads to more fulfillment in our life and more of a sense of purpose because we're taking charge of helping ourselves become more knowledgeable and more aware of our surroundings. And of course, knowledge is always power. Knowing what's going around you and understanding the world around you is such a powerful tool because you're able to understand why people are doing certain things, and that will help you so much even if you weren't in business. Just in your personal relationships, and being aware is going to help you so much. So I want to also talk about why knowledge will help you stay ahead of trends. That's something that not a lot of people touch on when they talk about this. And it's the idea that because trends are just trends, they change every day. Things that are in style now will be out of style in a month or two. And that's why I always advise having a backbone to your brand and your company, having something that you guys always sell or you always focus on. That's your brand. And if you stripped away all the trends and the flashy items, you have to have a backbone that still holds your company together. Because as I said, since trends are changing every single day, if at one point all the trends that your company is built off of suddenly just become irrelevant, you will be left with no consistent and loyal customer base. Instead, all of your customers will jump ship to whatever the next trend is, and you will be lost. You won't have a backbone that you have loyal customers who came to you for that backbone versus the trendy items. So I always advise having that backbone, and you won't lose yourself in trends, and you will have something in case those trends disappear. But at the same time, to see growth, it is important to know the trends and work with them, flow with them. Because if you just let yourself, only have that backbone, follow no trends, and just do whatever you want, for some people that may work, but I see most often that ends up being very slow growth because you aren't giving the customer what they want at that time. Another thing is very easily you can become outdated, and the human just wants to always be like its peers. And if you're outdated, people aren't going to want to shop with you, work with you, because you aren't following what is currently going on. So I think we all have to be very willing to adapt. By educating ourselves into what's going on in the world, we are able to anticipate trends, learn from them, and when we know something is going and coming up, we can immediately hop into action and be willing to adapt to that trend. And that is something that comes from self development. Because if we can understand what's going on around us and we are aware of the world around us and the changes it's going through, we'll be able to reflect that in our products, in our services, and ultimately our relationship with the customer. So, the willingness to adapt is something that is definitely a mindset shift. It's something that you have to know going into it, especially if you're a company that focuses on trends, because you have to allow yourself to pivot and not fall in love with something so deeply that you don't want to change it ever. You have to be able to pivot your company, your idea, be flexible, and trust the process and your work that led you to where you need to go, because you have put in so much work into it. And by you doing these self-development tactics, you are giving yourself a head start against your competitors, because you know what to expect. A, B, you are willing to change what you're currently doing to follow that trend, to follow what customers want. In the end, the customers are the ones that really lead a business, because they are the ones that purchase from the business. You absolutely have to follow whatever it is that they want, because as a business, the ultimate goal of the business is to fulfill a need in the market. And if the customer says, I don't have that need anymore, I have this need now, then you have to change. Because if the customer doesn't have that other need anymore and you're selling product for that need, then who's going to be buying it? They don't need that product anymore. And instead, if they suddenly have this new need and you can recognize that, then will be able to invest your time correctly into creating the product that this new customer needs. But as I said, keep your backbone. Branding sometimes, especially today, has a lot more to do with the personal connection and the story of the company versus just the products that you're selling. In the past, that was what it was. Your brand was your product. You and your company were your product. Your product was just everything. It resembled everything your company was. But today, especially with the rise of social media and the idea that video marketing and having a personal connection has really become important, it's important to take that into account and know that your brand is so much more than just what you sell on your shelves. It is so much more. It's more about who the creators are. What's the story? What's their purpose? Why are they doing this? Um, and if you can reflect that in any product you create, no matter if you are filling this need or that, you will keep the backbone and integrity of your company intact, and you'll be able to adapt to whatever the new trend is and stay ahead of your competition. So, with that, because we've talked enough about what self development is and how we have to be in the right mindset for it, I want to start talking about how you can actually do self development. And before we get into that, one thing I want to say is self development is a choice. Just because you're listening to this podcast or you are watching a TED Talk or, as I said, you're reading a book, does not mean you're suddenly going to be all those things I mentioned, ahead of the curve, ahead of your competitors, be aware of the world. Like, it does not, those things aren't equals. You have to be proactive from what you're consuming, because all of these self-development tactics are all about consumption of information, reading a book, listening to a podcast, watching a video. All of those are just consuming the information and putting it in your brain. once it's there, it is up to you to turn that information into an initiative to actually apply that to your company and your brand. So I'm going to give a few examples of things that I do for self development that I've been loving and suggestions of ones you guys can do as well. So, as I first mentioned, podcasts. If you're listening to this podcast, well, kudos to you. You are already on the right road to being much better at self development. A few other podcasts I absolutely love to listen to are the Gold Digger podcast by Jenna Kutcher. She is incredible. I support her 100%. The kind of production and the quality of her episodes are incredible. The guests are incredible. And I think you guys will really love her. So once you're done listening to this episode, head on over to her and listen to hers. And the Dream Achieve podcast by Hannah Ashton is one that she just did a relaunch of the podcast, and I've been absolutely loving it. She has been bringing on such amazing guests and talking about a very diverse topics, variety of topics that I didn't even think really applied until to business until I listened to the episode, and I was like, hold on, that is a struggle that I face, and that is something I understand, I can relate to. And hearing the speaker, the interviewee, talk about it, I was able to learn so much from it. So kudos to Hannah. I have been on her podcast if you guys are interested in listening. And yeah, I absolutely love her. She is such a girl boss. She is always working, and I love everything that she's doing. So those two, and then the last podcast I love and I really recommend is the Game Changer podcast by Erin May Henry. I think I just love her. She also is she's a coach and she has a ton of courses, but she also is a YouTuber. And I first found her through YouTube, and she launched a podcast and I started listening. I love it. She also does guest interviews, but she sometimes does solo episodes like I'm doing right now. But yeah, she's incredible, and you guys can listen to all three of these. The next thing you can do is obviously reading a book. Books are so important, and it's something that I think our generation has kind of lost touch with. The idea that books can give us value too, instead of just what we find on social media, what we find on channels like YouTube. And I'm not discrediting YouTube. In fact, the next bullet point I have is actually video content. But books themselves, guys, they are so incredible. So a few that I love for self development and I have read are the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Girl Stop Apologizing. Those two have been absolute favorites. I absolutely love both of them, and I definitely recommend checking them out and reading them. The book I'm currently reading is How to Win Friends and Influence People. This book I've just started it. I'm only on like page 10 probably, but I have been loving it. It's been already really influential, and I've learned a lot. So these 3 books I would highly recommend. And yeah, guys, there are so many lists of self-development books. Just type that into Google. Google will become your best friend in this. Type that into Google, place an order on Amazon, and within 2 days you will receive your new book. Just take a afternoon to curl up on the sofa and just read. I absolutely also love annotating. And like I said, how consuming versus action is very different. I love to have a notebook and pen and paper, or even just a pen and I write in the book if it's mine own, that where I just highlight things where I'm like, this is what I can do for my business to incorporate this tactic. Write those down. That will be so helpful, because it's so easy to read a book or listen to a podcast, get up and be so inspired, and that day you get everything done on your to-do list and you feel great. The next day you wake up, you're in a slump. You don't want to do anything anymore, and suddenly all that inspiration is gone. But if you can actually figure out which tactics you can implement in your business to incorporate whatever strategies the book or podcast talks about, you will be so much more equipped and more motivated to actually get those done because you know what the steps are. It's the same thing with project planning, and I talk about that on my YouTube channel. But the idea that when you say, I want to paint or repaint the house, or I want to repaint, my room, yes, that can be a big project, especially, you know, paint, covering up everything and then painting. That can seem like a huge project. But if you know, okay, I know what color I want, or I have pasted in my calendar, I'm going to go to the store for 2 hours this weekend to pick a color. If you know that kind of these are the steps, and that applies to this new strategy you're going to implement too, if you know the steps going into it, you will have a much better chance at actually doing it because you know how to implement it and you have no excuses, no roadblocks to get it done. With that, my last self development strategy is video content. Guys, in this day and age, not only still pictures on Instagram are great, but video content is king. That's what's becoming the most powerful, and it's time that we all really just understood that and turned to video content. There is so much content on things like IGTV, YouTube. So the next time you are binge watching BuzzFeed tasty videos, instead choose to watch a TED Talk or listen to an interview of a CEO. Make that time useful and make that time something that you can reflect on and know, like, I actually spent that time wisely. Even though I was relaxing, I was just watching a video. It's very calming because you don't have to do anything, but in just watching that video, you already learned, and you're already learning something new that you can implement. And that itself is such a great help, like such a great strategy for self development, because you're learning, but you are also incorporating that into your daily routine. Um, and like I said, it is hard. This was something that is a choice. You can't just say, I'm going to do it and then not commit to it. There's been so many times I've picked up a book and then put it down and then never picked it up again. It is so important to just say, I'm going to finish this book, and maybe even set a deadline for yourself. Make sure you finish that book, even for your own sake of being able to say, I can do this. I can do what I set my mind to. I can finish this goal. And with that, if you're setting those goals, you're being consistent, you're going to become such a more knowledgeable person and see these changes in your business. And you'll be in such a better place, and directly with that, your company will be too. I found that as I've consumed more and I learned more, I've been able to reflect that in my conversations when talking to clients or followers online, even when I'm in person talking to real professionals like investors, uh, and I go to networking events. I always have something to add to the conversation, to bring up from my own experiences of watching that TED Talk or watching this interview or reading this book that I can bring up in conversation, and I have that value add that you need. As coaches, as freelancers, you always want to be adding value to your audience. And if you can do that by watching these videos and taking what you've learned from them, adding your own experience, adding your own stories, and telling them again, you will be able to always consistently add value, and that is so important. And I always live by the motto, consuming will inspire creation, and I've always lived by that. The last thing I want to say is, this entire episode we've been talking about how you can become a better person, how instead of, listening to music in the car, you can listen to a podcast. Turn that wasteful time, quote unquote wasteful time, to productive time. But I want to say, as fair warning, don't always work. That's something I've taken a while to learn, but Guys, we cannot always be working, or else you will get burnt out so fast. And that's even worse than being in a rut. If you get burnt out, you don't want to even step back up. Being in a rut, you want to, but you don't know how. These are such different things, and you just never, ever want to get burnt out. The best way to do that is to balance when you are working and when you're not. See, I'm not saying every single time you want to watch a BuzzFeed tasty video, you force yourself to, no, I have to watch another interview of the CEO. No, let go, watch that BuzzFeed tasty video, follow the recipe, go cook, do what you love, but also dedicate time to focusing on yourself and bettering yourself, but also save time for your personal time, for you just have fun and not worry about work. You have to find that balance and separate the two. Otherwise, you're constantly going to be working or you're constantly going to be relaxing. And either way, nothing is going to get done. And with that, I hope you guys learned something from today's episode. I love talking about self development and everything else. I am constantly sharing what I'm doing, who I'm watching, what podcasts I'm listening to, books I'm reading on my Instagram, or the TMB Women Business Instagram. So if you guys are interested in following and learning more about what we're up to, just follow me on there. And I hope you guys learned something. Definitely leave us a review on iTunes or just send me any questions you have. Reach out to me on social media and I will answer them. Thank you guys so much for listening once again, and I'll see you guys next week, Sunday morning at 8 a.m. for next week's episode. Bye, guys. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the TMB Women in Business podcast. Check out our Instagram, where we provide you with the answers to all the questions you have about entrepreneurship. For an email recap of this week's episode, join our email list at tiny.cc/TMBWIBEMAIL. If you want to join a community of like-minded entrepreneurs where I give case-by-case advice to you, join our Facebook group. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you listen. If you're listening to this episode on our YouTube channel, subscribe and leave a comment. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you next week with even more business advice.